When I was growing up then, I was about maybe 14, 15, 16, and so like that. That's all, we just had fun. We just had fun then.
Say hey, hey baby, hey baby, love conquers all. What makes the sky change from gray to blue? When I'm with you, love conquers all. And my heart gives a happy beat, happiness safely, love conquers all.
Once upon a time, and happily ever after, and a lot more in between. We're here with Eugene, Asagai, I'm Miriam, and we're here to learn about us and our history through the lens of music and movement. And there's always a part of a story that's the place, and there's always the people who are part of that story, and then what this story means to us. And I think that we'll be led on that journey by you, Baba. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure being here with you today. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing that you're doing. It's just, bringing the information to people that is history. And I'm so glad to be able to be part of it, let you have me being part of this history lesson that you're giving today. And I would like to say thank you.
Yes, and thank you. Likewise, our stories are interwoven in magical and musical ways. So let's go way back, or, like it was yesterday or yesteryear. And tell us, where are you from? And, where did your journey begin? Bring us to that place in your time machine.
Okay, well, actually, now I'm a kind of old guy. I'm born in 1938 in New York City. We moved to the Bronx in 1946. And in 1946, I attended the school, PS 63. That was my elementary school. From there to PS 55, and the next was Morris. Now, when we talk about PS 63, that was a school that was in the area that it was just after the war in that time, around 1945 and 46. And you would find that New York City was a completely different place at that time. In New York City, there were streets with trolley cars running through the street, and there was so many different things. The 3rd Avenue L, and this is where we lived close to that area at that time. We lived on 168 between 3rd and 4th, and right down the area there was the 3rd Avenue L. This is before they took the L down, they took the trolley tracks out, and everything became buses and so forth, But however, back in 1955, I would say was the time that I had gotten very much involved with the 50s music. 50s music actually started in Morris High School. When I attended Morris High School, it was a completely a new thing for me, because in elementary school and in junior high school, I was singing as a soloist and doing classical music, semi-classical music. And when I had ended Morris High School, everyone in there was singing what they call today Doo Wop, but it was really rhythm and blues music. everybody had a group. Every group was around at that time, and if you were not singing, you just didn't belong. There was two fractions of people in the school. One was the people who were musicians, singers. The other was the athletes. Now, strangely enough, the time that I entered Morris High School, it was at 1953, one of the students in there was Colin Powell. So actually,
a musician or an athlete?
he was an athlete.
All right.
Colin Powell. He used to run the track. He used to run the on the track team, and so it was so many people doing different things at that time. But at any rate, I remember, since I'm on Colin Powell, I can remember back at that time that he was a tall guy, you know, thin guy, you know, just running track, and he graduated, I believe, in 1954. He left Morris High School. However, he went on to go to City College, and the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
But this history is about you, and this story is about you. And if I could ask that we go back now, because I was intrigued by the trolley cars running through the streets, and I was picturing you running through the streets as a young boy, and you know, maybe going down to the corner store and buying with a few cents whatever that you might have wanted to snack on. But you must have also heard music in your home, and I don't know if you went to church, and can you maybe paint a picture of your
Oh, yes.
Because you have now clued us in that you were into music, but take us back and say, how did you get into music?
All right. Now, the music part about it, I'm going to tell you something right before that. You mentioned about the 2 cents, you know, the pennies and so forth.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, when you said that, it reminded me about how it used to be. You could go to the candy store with a nickel and buy up the whole store. You know, you had everything was a penny or 2 cents and that type of thing, and it was really a time that was unbelievable. You know, you'd get a bag of potato chips for 5 cents, and it was so really unbelievable. Ice cream and, you know, sodas, everything was a nickel or a dime. Nothing was more than a dime, you know. But getting back to the music portion that you were saying, it was really an interesting thing to be able to see so many of the artists that were back in Morris High School at that time start off going to different record companies. It started off with one group, a gentleman by the name of Dean Barlow. He was really the first to get a record contract with MGM Records. So Dean Barlow, when he got this contract with them, now the chords, I have a lot to tell you about the chords, because if you can remember a song called Shaboom, that was the song that actually bridged the gap between rock and roll and rhythm and blues.
Life could be a dream, life could be a dream. Do, 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 shaboom.
I say that because the chords were a rhythm and blues group. But in 1954, when they recorded Shaboom, the chords actually sort of changed the history of music, because that's when people started to talk about rock and roll. Now, I'm going to go a little further to tell you about the rock and roll era. See, back in 1940s and the early 50s, we had disc jockeys back there in New York. One gentleman by the name of Jack Walker, then we had Tommy Smalls, Dr. Jive. These were black disc jockeys in New York that actually were on stations, AM stations, that you couldn't, you know, you'd have to get your earphones to actually hear it. It was all the way down the end of the dial. And in 1954, that's when Alan Freed had come to New York. And when Alan Freed had come to New York, he had come from Cleveland. He had a radio station there in Cleveland. That's when it was like, say, for example, if you have a tree, and the roots of the tree was the rhythm and blues. When Alan Freed had come to New York, sort of merged that tree, and that tree sort of become rock and roll, because you had different artists doing different things. Like, for example, in the blues era, rhythm and blues era, they were all black artists, 99% black artists. And at the same time, you had the pop artists that were on the other side. Alan Freed had come and merged the two. So therefore, that became Elvis Presley. And you also had groups like Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers and so forth and so on. So when that tree started to grow, it branched out. When it branched out into one era. One era was what we call soul music today. The other era was the heavy rock and heavy metal. So that's how that's how that tree sort of separated itself.
Great. So let's now dig deeper, go down into the roots. You mentioned the radio and the dial. So let's take you back to when you were tuning into your favorite music as a young person. And what did you tune into? And, what were your early musical influences?
When I used to come from school, and this was back in junior high school at the time, I would turn on the radio and I would hear Dr. Jive. And Dr. Jive, he was the rhythm and blues artist, I say disc jockey. And the way that he had things going on was everybody was part of it. In other words, the young kids would put dedications in, every week or every day, said, I want to hear this record and I want to dedicate it to so and so. It was a real fun thing going back at that time with Dr. Jive and Harold Jackson and many of those artists that were the pioneers of the rhythm and blues music itself. And that was the thing that I did with the music. And it is so ironic because every portion of your life changes with something different. Mm-hmm. See, even before the music part of it, I was an avid baseball fan.
Okay.
You see, so when I say that, I lived in the Bronx, but however, I was a Dodger fan. The Dodgers was in Brooklyn. But in New York City at that time, we had several teams. We had 3 teams. We had the Dodgers, we had the Yankees, and we had the Giants. Now, when the Yankees were home, the Giants were away. And when the Giants were home, the Yankees were away. I used to walk every day, my buddy and I, we used to walk to the Polo Grounds or the Yankee Stadium to collect autographs. And at one point, I think I had everybody's autograph that ever existed in 1950, and 1949 and 1950, So that was one of the things that growing up, that part of my life was the younger part. And then I discovered that there was music. We used to just play for fun. We had at that time, you would have makeshift things. We had what we call stickball. In other words, we would take a broomstick and hit a Spalding ball, and we would slide on concrete. We did all of those type of things, growing up, and it was the point that we realized around in 1953 and 1954 that my buddies and I, we said, there are girls out here, and they're listening to the music. They're listening to the music. And so that's how we got involved with, going to this we used to have like a little center. It would be like in one store in the area, and everybody would congregate and everybody would be together. And everybody would be listening to the music and dancing, and we had great times, great innocent child fun, and that was in the early 50s. And quite naturally, the thing about it was when the music part about it, when people recording, everyone had a group just about, and this was around in 1954 and 1955. And in Morris High School, it was a place that I don't know how I got through because I did nothing but cut class every day, going in the back of the room singing, with one group or another. And there was one time we had an audition with Atlantic Records. And this fellow, his name was Robert Carr. He used to sit beside me in one of my classes. And so we started this group, 4 of us, and we called ourselves the Royal Tones. We went down to Atlantic Records. So in those days, unlike today, you'd have to send a tape in and things like that. No, you didn't do that back at that time. You'd go right into the station, and Jerry Wexler sat on a table, and so he says to us, okay, fellas, sing. So we sang, you know. And when we finished, he said, okay, go home and bring your parents down. We're going to sign a contract. I was about 15 then. I didn't know what they meant. I didn't care what they were talking about contracts. But at any rate, a couple of weeks later, Robert told me, he said, well, the deal fell through with Atlantic Records because one of the fellas in the group, his mother didn't want him to sing professionally. So that was the end of that Royal Tone group. At the time we were singing, you see, we sang without music. Everything was a cappella. Okay. And I mean, I can remember the first time that we had a recording session with instruments. It was the weirdest thing that we ever saw. You know, a drummer and a piano player and a bass player and a guitar player. That was weird to us, you see. But before that, we just sang a cappella. Everybody could get their pitch perfectly without even, you know, it was just a natural thing that had happened. That's why the record companies had come so excited about bringing us in to the different companies, and they
were the music.
We were the music at the time, you see, and companies like Atlantic Records and Old Town Records and so many of them. You know, there was one, but at the sad part about a lot of that was all of us went down for different groups and had different auditions, but there were some people in some record companies that was really, really, really terrible on that, because what they would do is, as you're singing a song, they would say, go back and do that part again. They're writing your song down as you were singing it. And I remember Bruce Records was one of the record companies that we did that with. And it was just amazing, you know. And so you would go out, and next thing you know, you hear that song on the radio. You hear the music on the radio, you know. That was the thing. But see, because we as kids did this just for fun. We had no really the knowledge of the business end of it. It's not like what we have today, this music called business, you know, quite naturally. It was a different thing in that time. But I could even go a little further, a little bit, while we're talking about how the record companies and that type of thing was. Back in 1975, after a big jump, I'm gonna go back. I had stopped singing, and I had found out that there was a organization called UGHA that was trying to bring the people back together again, trying to bring artists back together. A fellow by the name of Ronnie I out in Jersey, he started this. So there were collectors and all type of people coming to the different places like that. So I remember going out to a meeting one day, and I met this fellow by the name of Louis Sovani. He was a collector. And I was just talking to him, just in general, and I said, yeah, you know, back in 1956, we did a session that lasted 12 hours, because this is how they used to do. We're going back again now to 56. They would say, well, let me see how you sound on records. So they gave us like, about 10, 12, 13 songs to learn, to see how we sound on records. So we knew the songs because they were more or less street songs at that time. This was in the 50s, in 56 to be exact. And the next thing we knew, we went down to the station, went down to the studio and recorded all these songs. We recorded all of these tunes and never paid too much attention to it. We recorded some of our own songs that they had put out. But it was a time that they were putting these records out as cover tunes. See, cover tunes was actually the tunes that were recorded by people that were unknown like us. And it was like the 10 top tunes of the week, of the year, of the day, I would say. And we did songs like Little Girl of Mine, Speedo, and things like that. And we did these tunes not really knowing what their intentions were. But however, we looked in the New York Times and it says today's items, 10 top tunes, but the thing about it was they didn't put our name on there. The name on there was a thing called like the Blades or this group, all the Angels and things like that. And when we approached this one particular guy, you know, and we asked him, well, how come our name is not? Oh, we forgot to do that. We got okay, you know, we didn't know, you know. But going back to '75, when I met this fellow Louis Silvani and asked him, did he remember any of the tunes that you know was recorded, you know, back at that time, recession, you know, and he called me up about a month later. He said, Gene, he said, I'm going to play some songs. Did these sound familiar to you? Would you believe in that one session, every song we did on that session was actually put out by different labels, different people. They sold that song many, many, many times to different companies as what they call budget albums. And those, again, those were the actual albums that people didn't know was the original artist. Okay, so I started to get a little bit more educated and realize what was going down at that time. So I went to all of the areas that I found that you know was doing record companies. I went to in the Bronx, went to the Bronx courts, looked up the records there, and find out who owned that company. I went to Brooklyn, did the same thing. I went to Queens, did the same thing. And the company out in Jersey called, in Essex County, was a company called Prom Records. And in Prom Records, I discovered that they had many of the albums we did call them different names. They called us the rockers, the teeners, and this, that, and the other, right? So I said, okay. I made a deal with the guy in Prom and told him I'd like to buy the masters. You know, he said, well, what do you want with these? Now, remember now, this is '75, and this was done in 1957, 56 and 57. So he said, well, what do you want with those? I said, I just reminisce, that type of thing. So I made a deal with him and purchased the masters. And at that time, I realized that we could do it ourselves. So all of the masters that I was able to find, that's the record that I had given you, the 7 top hits plus 1. Right there, as a matter of fact. I made this album and put that, actually all of the songs on there were the songs that we recorded back in 1957. We were the Limelighters, but they didn't give us that name as the Limelighters. All of the songs on there were accordingly by other people. Now, these were the original songs were done by like the Cadillacs and the Platters and that type of thing. Those were the original songs. But when the company had given it to us, that's what they wanted to just try to get us to do these songs. They put it on a budget label. People overseas did not know this was not the Cleftones or the Teenagers or the Platters. They didn't know that. They heard the song. And that's what these people were doing back at that time.
And I'm so glad to hear how you were a good steward of your own, creativity. And as I look at the titles here, because I imagine that 1975 was a very different time than 1965.
Yes.
And so I want to go back to 1955 because
Okay.
I gather from you that was a good time.
Oh,
I
it was a good
some more
time.
stories about then. I see titles like "I Want You to Be My Girl" and "Church Bells May Ring" and "The Magic Touch." So there's a lot there.
Right. Well, those songs were out by famous artists. When I say that, young artists who were doo wop artists at the time. Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, that was their song, "I Want You to Be My Girl." Okay. "Little Girl of Mine" was the Cleftones. Speedo had his song, Speedo. They often call me Speedo in that. And so "Church Bells May Ring," that was done by a group called the Willows. You see, so when they had us do those songs to supposedly hear how we sound, nobody knew that, we didn't know that they were planning on using those songs for a budget label for their own purposes. That's what they did.
So can you tell us a little bit about those kids that you ran with on your way to school and on the way home and sang in the back of the class? Tell us a little bit more about the people that you were surrounded by.
Yes. Well, to start off with, it was a camaraderie there. Everybody was pushing for the next person. There was no jealousy. There was no envy. because what happened was when Dean Barlow, going back now to 1953 and 54, when he was one of the first to have a recording session with, it was JD Records, but it was part of MGM, he started telling other people, and then the Chords had gotten involved with Atlantic Records, and they told other people. Then another group called the Mellows Group got involved with JD Records, and so everybody was pushing for each other. And it was a wonderful thing. It was a wonderful thing because that's why today, as you see on the picture that I had given you, all of those people were our friends. We all grew up together in one form or another.
And where did you go to listen to music, and who did you go with?
Well, we had our little center that we would go to. It was a little clubhouse, so to speak, and we would listen to the music there. And the biggest thing about it was we had our basement parties, our red light parties. That was the big deals. You know, those were the days because, you know, you'd go, you know, well, it would be Friday evening or something like that. Somebody would say they're selling tickets for a dime or a quarter, whatever it is, for going to be the party, the red light party down at somebody's basement, and that was it. That was really, really the good days.
How did you dress for a party like that?
Well, you know, believe it or not, there was something about the 50s people in general. We just believed in dressing up. I don't know what it was, but in 1950, I would say in 1950, from 1950 on up, every Sunday, if we went to church, some people went to church, some people didn't go to church. But at 1 o'clock, everybody was on the block. Everybody was on the block, togged down. I mean, you know,
Togged down?
yeah, togged down. That that is an expression that we used to use back in the 50s. You know, we used to say togged down, meaning they were dressed up and everything. There was a thing, say, for example, for your shoes, you know. They used to have these shoes called French toes, you know. And with those French toes, there used to be a white stitch around them. And people would come out on Sunday, and if you didn't have your shoes with this white stitch around it, I mean, shined up, you better go back home and do something, you know. So these were some of the things. And the young ladies were always dressed as well, you know. And that was the thing about the 50s ideas, you know.
I understand that you met your wife during that time.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
she
right.
also sang?
She sang. My wife sang with a young lady, and just so happened we had a recording session, and the young lady did not show for the recording session. They were very disappointed, and quite naturally we brought them home and everything because we all had to ride the train home, and then we started dating, you know, and that was really how we started dating like that. Of course, I would say most of the time we would rehearse in the different schools. And they would be there, we would be there, we walk home together, and that would be it, you know. And we didn't do too many shows at that time, you know. We did a lot of rehearsing. We rehearsed every day, and that's the reason why singing a cappella was so easy for us, because every day when you sang, you hit that first note. You hit the same note. It was all, if you were in C, you hit C. You know, you didn't have to know. The piano player would come back and play the note, and it was the same C that you heard, you know. So those were the things that we had done back in that time. You would very seldom find any group that would be singing and going from one key to the other and didn't realize coming into the key by just automatically just singing the note without any instruments, you know. So that was one thing that we did, yeah.
Can you tell us about the Apollo Theater?
The Apollo Theater. Wonderful, wonderful experience, the Apollo Theater. You know, and I remember the first time that I attended the Apollo Theater. I think I must have been about maybe 9 or 10. And I was really enthused about Billy Eckstine and things, you know, people like that, you know, in the 40s and 50s music, you know. And I remember seeing people like Cab Calloway on the Apollo Theater, you know, Cab Calloway and great bands was there. You know, Count Basie's band. It was nothing nothing unusual to go to the Apollo and see a big band playing, because it was always a big band, because the big band usually be the band that was the backup band for the artists that would come out. So I remember Reuben Phillips. I remember people like Illinois' Jackette. I remember Count Basie's band, Buddy Johnson's band. He was a regular there at the Apollo Theater. And all of these people had their things really going on. And the single artists were coming, and then the group thing started to come. The Spaniels, the Moonglows, and the Chords, and you can go on and on and on. All of the groups, that every group that ever performed went to the Apollo Theater at one time or another. Every group that ever performed, and I would say that any one of them, you would never really find one of the groups out there being booed.
Nobody got swept off the stage.
Nobody got swept off of there.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I mean, as you talk, I imagine the soundtrack of your life. All these different decades now bring us from the 50s to the 60s, because as we grow, we take on more responsibility.
Right.
Our life brings us in new directions.
Okay.
So what happens for you as you grow into the 60s?
When I started in the 60s, I got married in 1961, my wife and I. Even before that, coming out of high school, as I said before, my main thing in school, was just, hey, I want to sing, and I didn't pay no attention to any academics or anything like that. I mean, we just want to sing. But quite naturally, I graduated in 1956. And the first thing that had come to me that was, I said, well, now, what am I going to do? What am I going to do now? So the first thing I was told, well, help me get a job. I graduated on a Friday. That Monday, I went out to the unemployment agency looking for a job. So now, since I didn't really pay much attention to the academics that I should have done at that time, I said, what kind of job am I going to do? So they put me in the garment centers. This is where I learned what work was all about. Now, in New York City, there was a garment center. I don't think it's as popular as it is then, today. But anyway, the garment center was, you did work for 8 hours for $1 an hour. And you worked like in factories. And I remember there was a place I worked in, and I had to stand there for 8 solid hours putting baby booties in a box, holding them like that. That was it. So I said, I got to be something better than this. And I had another job making $50 a week now. I'm doing, better than that now. So it was another thing that I was taking material up to the cutters, that time. I said, no, life got to be better than this. So fortunately, I had remember going to the employment agency, and they said, would you mind working in the mailroom? I said, yeah, I'd work in the mailroom. And that means, I can wear a tie and I could sit down maybe now and then. I worked at the Polio Foundation in 1957. And in 1957, that's when I really started to get interested in the things that were going on. Inside the Polio Foundation, there was a thing called a duplicating unit. In that unit, they had things that was exciting. There was a press, a printing press. At that time, it was called a 1250 multilith press. Then they had a camera and different things like that. And I just wanted to get in that unit. So I worked so hard until I got in the unit. Now in 57, I got in this unit and I picked up everything. I learned how to run the press. I learned how to use the camera. I learned how to use all of that stuff. And I realized at that time there was a possibility of printing being a career. So I went into that and I decided, well, I know I got to go back to school. So then I went back to college. I went back to Brooklyn Queens College, it was called at that time, and went in for the associate's degree in graphic arts and advertising technology. And so I did that at night, over a course of about 10 years or so, but that's what I did. Meanwhile, I was in the printing field very deep. I had every aspect of printing down. I was in production management and everything like that. So it just so happened, after doing all of this work, I said, I know I should be making more money. And I remember asking the guy, Arthur was his name. Arthur, when do you think I can make $250 a week? And Arthur looked at me, reared back, and said, well, Gene, I don't see it in the near future. So I said, now I know I got to get out of this field. I did a lot of things. I had my own press. I bought a press and put it in my basement and all of these type of things, and I was doing my printing. I had a little business called offset printing at the time, But when he told me that, I said, no, something's got to be different. I got to get in the city. I don't care what I do in the city. So my brother-in-law and I, we decided that we were going to go down to the city and go into, take all the tests, every test that had come out. So we took the test for trackman. We got down on the tracks and the train looked like it was a 10-story building coming at you. I said, no, I don't think I want this job. We didn't take that one, It kept going that way, and then finally they had something in New York that was called police administrative aid. And it was the first class that they were taking civilians and putting them into the police department. So now I said, I'm going to take this job. I'm getting, this is a city, So they put us in school for I think it was about 8 to 10 weeks, to learn about the penal law, learn all about, the law enforcement itself. Then we were working, got assigned to different precincts. Like I was in the 32nd, the 30th, and the 34th precinct. And after that, I realized, I said, well, gee, these guys don't have it too bad, the police department. But now I'm 28. I was too old to take the test for police officer. One of the guys who was at the time had worked in correction and transferred to the police department. And he said, well, in correction, they're taking them up to 31. So I said, I put my application in for that too. I put an application, and that was my career. From 1968 until 1989, I worked as a correction officer and became captain at Rikers Island. And that was for 2 years I worked there as a captain at Rikers Island, and then retired in 89.
Oh, but you never let go of music.
Never let go of music, because the thing about it, it was so odd. Although I was working as an officer, and I worked at the Bronx House of Detention for 19 years, 19 and a half years before being promoted. And at that time is when, during the 70s was going, because I would go to the meetings and things like that for the Doo Wop thing, because I discovered that the 50s music was being played again. It started around in 75, around in that time, because what was happening was as I mentioned before, when that Beatles stage had come in, it knocked out rhythm and blues music. But there were people underground and the college stations. Those were the people who were actually keeping it alive. And they were the ones that was playing our music. And I never forget, really blew my mind. I was at home one night, and I was listening to a station from Jersey. And in the station, the guy played one of our records that we had recorded in '56. It blew me away. I said, oh, wow. I called him up and told him, yeah, that was my record I played. He said, wow. So we became good friends, and he told me about this organization called UGHA that was forming out in Jersey. And I went out there one night, and when I went out there, it blew my mind, because I never expected to see what I saw. Because out there, when I walked into the school, it was over 1,500 people sitting in there. And the 1,500 people in there were all white. It blew my mind, because I said, I never believed anybody was listening to that music. And all of those records at one time were playing in the stations of the rhythm and blues people, more or less. And then it stopped. And when it stopped, we didn't have it anymore. But things started to happen. Motown had come out.
What are some of those stories, and how did the music reflect that?
Well, it was so very interesting, because back at the time that we grew up, people either went one way or the other. In other words, they either became a law enforcement officer or they became a drug dealer, and it was that extreme. I mean, it was some people in the middle that did very well, as far as the two extremes. So when I happened to work in the Department of Correction, I'd seen so many of my friends I grew up with in elementary school. So many. And there was a time there was almost like a homecoming thing when I would see people from the other side, you know. But again, it was a misfortune that they had in that sense. And a lot of people who were in there, they had seen me. A lot of them I've seen today straighten up and big business people,
Great.
you know, and that type of thing. Because if they have seen me, just used to say, well, Gene, you know, in fact, I know so many of them, as I said before, and a lot of them were doo-wop singers as well. But, however, it changed their life. They realized to be able to, life was completely different than the way it was, you know. But it was a tough time. To say.
So then we have the 70s. Like we've done a little bit of the 50s, a little bit of the 60s. What happens and what changes? Are you still in New York? You
Still in the Bronx.
Okay. Okay.
Well, you know, the Bronx, now that is a very interesting time too, the 70s. Because, see, I had really, I did, as I mentioned before, the part that we had started the doo-wop coming back, that was around in 74 and 75 and that type of thing. So the late 70s, my buddy Arthur Cryer, who actually I had grown up with, and we sang together and everything. In fact, he was with me when I was in the Limelight as in one show we did at one time and things like that. But I discovered that he was still in the business. He never left the business. And he went to Motown when Motown first started. He was a writer in Motown. He wrote a lot of songs, and there was a song that was out, the person by the name of Curtis Lee wrote, and it was called Pretty Little Angel Eyes. And he was the bass singer of that. That was his song. And this song called Who Put the Bomb. Now, these were the groups of the 60s. When I say the groups in the 60s that were here in the United States, but they were on a pop style, you see. So they would have artists of the 50s back these other artists up, individual, like Frankie Avalon, you would have Curtis Lee, and a lot of these artists were backed up by artists of the 50s. Now, artists of the 50s, like Arthur was in the group, and he was in the group that did this type of backup, one of the groups that did this type of backup. And I realized he was on radio one day, and I heard him on radio, and he was talking about all the different things that he was doing and so forth. I said, "Gee, I got to get in touch with Arthur," because I hadn't seen him in I don't know how many years. You know, and then we had gotten involved with UGHA again, the United Group Harmony Association. And it just so happened that he stayed very deep into it, and his son, and he actually saw the whole revolution of the music, how it changed. His son was in a group called GQ. If you remember that group, they did disco nights and things like that. Now, they started in his living room, and Sabu Cryer is his son. And they had a very big career on Arista Records and places like that, you know. And so Arthur was doing a lot of talent search. He was doing these type of things in the Bronx to keep the kids out of trouble. So it happened that Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, to keep them out of trouble, a lot of these counselors got around and say, well, hey, this is one way that we can keep these kids from getting out of trouble. Let's have them do a dance. Let's see who could be the best in the borough to dance. That's where the break dance had come from in the Bronx. And these guys would be out there with the break dance and doing that type of thing. Now, a lot of people in that era, DJ Herc, for example, and people like that in the Bronx, had grown up playing the music and DJing the music and things like that, right? Arthur used to say, well, you know, let's record these guys. And then other people said, nah, they ain't gonna be doing nothing. The music ain't gonna last. And this was the hip hop music thing. And so the rest is history there.
From Doo Wop to hip hop.
Yep,
I mean,
yep.
that's where we are now. So, and what was you? How did you take that in? You were
Now,
witnessing this.
here's the thing about it. At the time, I wasn't really doing any singing. I wasn't into the singing part of nothing. But I was going to a lot of meetings and meeting a lot of people, you know, and doing that type of thing. And as mentioned, Arthur was very involved because he would put on these talent shows. And believe it or not, in the talent shows was people like Curtis Blow, Melly Mel, and these were the kids on the block. You see, because back at 180th Street in the Bronx is where a lot of that hip hop started. And that was one of the, you know, the big things that was going on in the 70s. Even before that, there was the disco era. Now, you're familiar with the disco era. In the Bronx, there was a club called, actually there was a lady in there called Sylvia Vanderpool, for example. She had a club called the Blue Morocco. And that was on Boston Road. Now on the Boston Road, the Blue Morocco, the 845, and all of these clubs were places you can go to and spend the whole night in there. You wouldn't have to worry about nobody bothering you or nothing like that. And she was so very instrumental in the disco era, as well as the hip hop era. Because you see, she had, if you might remember the Shane, that song, right?
I'm gonna dance, 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 ooh, till the break of day. I say, shame, shame on you.
Shirley was part of Shirley and Lee, who was a rhythm and blues doo-wops, not they were doo-wop, but they were really rhythm and blues back at the, you know, in the Apollo Theater. Shirley and Lee, they had a song out. But Sylvia Vanderpool got her to be able to change this style and go into what was at the time called the disco music. So she was there with that. She really started that. Not only that now, when Sylvia heard a lot of these groups doing this hip hop music, her and her husband decided, well, they were going to try to do something with that. And they were the owners of Sugar Hill Records. And of course, you know, Rapper's Delight, that was one of the first main records on there. And they recorded Rapper's Delight. And that's where the big braze of the hip hop thing started out there.
Sing it on and on and on and on and on. The beat don't stop until the break of dawn.
And it was so many people that was involved with that, young people that was involved with the real beginning of it. It was astonishing, you know. Arthur was a very key factor into bringing them into different people, you know, because he was in, you know, in the business, so he would have a lot of people that would, you know, he would introduce them to. And remember, we were going one time we did the Don't Let 'Em Starve project. We had taken it to Joe Robinson. He was the owner of Sugar Hill Records. And, we had taken it to him, so we were sitting in his office and whatnot. He was telling us about it. And quite naturally, the thing about this particular project that we did in 85 was we got all of our friends together, and this was Arthur's idea. One day, because at that time I was singing with him in a group called the Mellows. You know, I started back with him in 83 in singing. And he said, I got an idea to, you know, do something like what they did with We in the World. And that's what the whole project with the Don't Let Them Starve project had come about.
I'm glad that you brought us to this because I've been looking at the title, and so now this is from the 80s.
This is from the 85.
And in 85, you're already vintage. Which is great. And you have continued to refine over time. And can you tell us just about the cover art? Though I'm curious because there is an intention there.
The cover. This is the time that I was hot into graphic arts, and I laid this out at the time, you know, because as I said, we never had money. We never had money, put it that way. And everything we did was from scratch. Donations, as far as in-kind donations and things like that. This whole project actually was done with the artists that we had, our friends, to be able to, and as a matter of fact, when you take a look at in fact, I have a copy of that on the Don't Let Them Starve project, you'll be able to see the singing on there. So what I actually had done was to each person that sang the line, I have a transcript on there, what line they sang. So Lenny Coco sang a line and this person sang a line and so forth. And that's how we were able to tell who sang what. And so the song Arthur had written, Don't Let Them Starve. And we put that together. That was the project that we had put together.
Give a helping hand to your fellow man, yeah. If he's doing bad, try to make him glad, yeah.
Don't turn your back, no, because you're doing good. That man lying there on the ground could be you. You better knock on wood. You better knock on wood, yeah. That man lying there on the ground could be you. Baby's dying, mothers crying.
That ain't the way it's supposed to be, oh no. We gotta help the needy, come on, and don't be greedy. We got to give, and give real fast.
Don't you let them stop. Don't you let them stop. While on that big fat turkey you got. Don't let them stop. Don't you let them stop. While on that big fat turkey you got.
That was in '85.
Yeah. Tell us about the Jive Five.
The Jive Five. Jive Five was a group that was out in Brooklyn. And a good friend of mine, the name is Gene Pitt of the Jive Five. Really good guys. And unfortunately, that so many of these artists are gone now. And I would say within the last few years, so many. Yeah.
Well, they're gone and they're not forgotten because you're here. You are the representation of a generation of music.
Well, thank you.
So who would you like to tell us about that really in this time, you're like, if there's a story I want you to know, I want you to hear this
Well,
one.
Herb Cox was a person I'd known back in the circuit when we were singing in the 50s and whatnot. However, he went through his field of banking. I went through my field in correction. We were all retired now. So it just so happened one day I'm down here and going to the Ingles store and I see, but Herb, what are you doing here? Hey, I live right down the block. So we actually end up living across the street from each other, right there in Fayetteville, just across the street. And so we say, well, we can put some things together. So we started to bring shows here in Atlanta. And we did that from '05 until about '09 at the Performing Arts Center. And so we brought a lot of the groups down and did a lot of shows like that. And it just so happened that Herb said, well, one of the members in the Cleftones that, couldn't do it anymore, they needed a member. So he persuaded me to get back into it again. And the last show we did was in 2017. And we did that show in Las Vegas, and that was the last one. Yeah, because Herb passed about 3 years ago now. And but that was it, and I had like all of the group that I was with, my Mellows group, all the members are gone now, Lillian, Arthur, and
So tell us about the show in Las Vegas.
Oh yeah, the show in Las Vegas was very interesting. It was called, it was a rockabilly type of show, but they had 2 Doo Wop groups there, and it was our group and a group called the Chimes, Otis William and the Charms. And that was the last performance. In fact, I think I have that on one of the things that I sent you too, yeah. That was the last thing that we did, and but it was fun.
All right, fun question. What do you think about music today?
Well, you know, it is just so that you have to realize that every generation has its music. And you'll always find something good in it, no matter what generation it is. There'll be something because there's only a certain amount of notes in the keyboard. There's 88 keys, and I mean, you're going to hear something in there that you're going to like. And it's something today that is very interesting, the way that they're actually, you know, portraying their music and that type of thing. I always learn to respect music no matter where it comes from or who's, you're going to find something in it. I had a very interesting thing happen one day on my telephone. I was called, and I had a company called, it was really, you could get your telephone, your computer fixed by calling CD Connect or something like that. So at any rate, I called him up, and I got a guy from India. And so while he was fixing it, we would start to talk about music. I'm telling him about the music from here in America. And he was telling me about the artists in India. And he was telling me about this artist that had about 40 albums. And then he started playing it because, you're on the computer, you could do this type of thing. And it was so fascinating because here we are exchanging completely 2 different cultures. And each one of us found so great in it. So like he said to me, he said, if there was only music in the world today, he said there would be no problems, because look at how music can actually relate to each other. I never met the guy, and just happened to be a person that was on the phone, and we started talking.
And you are an absolute gem. You're priceless. And now, you have a radio program, you share these songs, you teach people. What are the kind of reactions you get from people when you play songs that they can't hear anywhere else? Like, what feelings come up? Can you tell us?
Oh, it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. And thanks to WRFG, and thanks to people such as the Manny right here, that made it possible for us to continue the station. And I would say that it's just priceless. I mean, I've had so many people, a lot of them are gone, but they were religiously on that station. I have people, one person that was with me from more than one, but one that would call me every week from the 22 years that I was there. It was the 20 years because we went into our own pandemics thing, right. But for the 20 years, and every week I would hear from Louis T. and he and his wife, and then there was another, Donald and Dolores. They were all listeners from the day one as well, Constance listeners from day one. So I mean, it is a fulfillment that I get, be able to share this type of thing with so many people. And there's always somebody new that I'm meeting, and I have a music store, and a lot of people never heard the station before, but when they come in, I tell them about the station. So now they're tuned in. So now they'll call up on the request they make a request, and it's really fulfilling to be able to know that people are out there that you can still do this for. And it's as you know, and the volume can tell you, we don't get paid, but that paycheck is much bigger when you're able to do something positive and know that you're really affecting somebody in a positive way, and that's priceless.
I appreciate the story of how you can use music for community building and connecting people across time and generations and across places wherever they are. What would you like to share that I haven't invited you to discuss? Well,
I think you've done so wonderful. You've really got things out of me that I haven't talked about in years. I haven't talked about in years, you know, and it's really, really nice to be here, to be able to have somebody listen. I really appreciate that.
Yes, Professor, yes. I mean, I didn't ask you your favorite food. I might as well. Do
Right.
you have one?
Well, you know, I tell you, I really don't have any particular favorite. You know, whatever my wife cooks, that's my favorite for the day. That's the favorite.
Wishing her a happy anniversary here in the upcoming month. 61 years. That's quite a journey.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
appreciate you not only for the interview, of course I appreciate the interview and this time with you. Just appreciate your dedication to your culture, to the music, to your community, and for being a living representation of what it looks like to take good care of who you are over all these decades till now. You're looking great. You sound great.
Thank you
and
so
there's
much.
so much to impart in terms of wisdom for us and for many, many others. So thank you for being you.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Appreciate that. All right, definitely.
All right.
If I Didn't Care, Eugene Tompkins.
If I didn't
care,
more than words can say, if I didn't care, would I feel this way? If this isn't love, then why do I thrill? What makes my head go round and round while my heart stands still? If I didn't care, would it be the same? Would my every prayer begin and end with just your name? And would I be sure that this is love beyond compare? Would all this be true if I didn't care for you?
if I didn't care. Honey child, more than words could say. If I didn't care, tell me, would I still feel this way? And what is this thing that makes my head go round and round and round? I just want to know. My head goes round, my heart stays still, and darling, I'm in love with you. Oh yeah, sing it to me now.
If I didn't
care,
would it be the same? Would my every prayer begin and end with just your name? And would I be sure that this is love beyond? Would all this be true if I didn't care for you? Thank you.
Thank you. We love you.
Thank you.